Cool. So we submitted a proposal in Fund 8 for the contributor infrastructure. So many of you may have seen some of the challenge settings for contributors. And the idea behind this proposal is when those contributors start, they're going to need some kind of starting blocks like infrastructure, the tools and processes, so they're actually kind of productive from the first day, rather than it just being like, oh, you've been funded as a contributor and you haven't got anything, you just kind of left your own devices and have nothing to kind of start with. So you've got to kind of do all this work at that point. And if you had like 30, 40 people in that situation, then you can obviously see quite a easy situation where you waste a lot of effort, basically.
Now, when you say contributor, that word comes out of no context for me. Can you set a little bit of context for that?
Yeah. So the starting kind of idea behind contributors is in around December, I kind of was starting to think about this a lot, about how we can submit proposals, idea-based proposals into kind of Catalyst, and how you can get quite tied to ideas when when you're going through this kind of process. And I went through this kind of quite a depth of that analysis to look at, okay, how could we consider funding contributors, just individuals rather than ideas? Because if you're funded as a contributor, you're much more flexible. You can move around much, you can focus on an idea, realize it's not the best idea to work on right now. And then, whether it's 1, 3, 5, 10 of you, you can move around very flexibly and support, the overall mission of what you're trying to, what those contributors are for. In the context of Catalyst would benefit from this kind of setup where people can just come in and do some help with some of the brunt work, the actual improvement of the processes, the improvement of the tech, all of these different areas that need improvement. Funding people as contributors, which is kind of just like, instead of employees, you're just being funded directly as a contributor. So a similar kind of concept, just being paid like a salary, instead of being like, oh, here's my idea for auditing or for collaboration. I have to have this kind of really well-refined proposal to get funding. So contributors is just an alternative model. But yeah, throw any questions. Is anyone not familiar with the contributor stuff? Please throw any hands up.
George, can you clarify the difference between Cardano and Catalyst contributor?
Yeah. So originally it was kind of like an all-in-one where I kind of did it in December, but then I realized there are kind of like two distinct kind of areas that are kind of better groupings. So for Catalyst contributors, they really focus on the Catalyst process itself. So it's, the kind of like we have the kind of these voter tools, community advisor tools, all these different kind of tools that bring it together. We have the kind of coordination during these events, always separate little kind of individual things that really help to make Catalyst, the cohesive unit it is. And then on the Cardano side, we have, well, it would also be really useful to have this kind of really collaborative glue, because that's what these contributors really are, is they help to bring things together for the Cardano side as well. And by that, I mean, it's the kind of the developer ecosystem. So all these SDK tools, we've got Plutus, Yellow eventually, those kind of side. And then we also have things like how people are running stake pools. So the scripts, what hardware you can use, all that kind of information around that, and maintaining it and improving it and making it that life a lot easier. Both of those kind of very more technical sides are a really kind of good collaborative unit of kind of contribution. So that's the kind of distinction. One's more Catalyst and governance focused, and the other one's more on this kind of development ecosystem and the node operation. They each have their own kind of mission and things they're kind of driving towards, bringing things together and helping to try and iterate that space.
And is this initiative focused on one or the other, or is it supporting both?
Yeah, so this contributor infrastructure kind of thing will be for both of them for the starting kind of point. And the idea of it is literally kind of the starting stages for both of those kind of cohorts. And then once they have it and it's set up for each of them, then they can just kind of take that. And then, from day one, that, those contributors will have ownership of that stack, and then kind of iterate and improve as they go. The idea behind this is infrastructure kind of analysis is to kind of look for all the requirements they have, look at the kind of existing solutions there are, look at the pros and cons, how you can mix and match things, and kind of give a kind of well-educated starting point for them that then they can refer to and then build on to decide, okay, here's the biggest problems we're facing. We're going to use something off the shelf, or we're going to start building something, so they can start to kind of collaboratively and iteratively just improve what they need for that kind of separate community, because that's really all they are at the end of the day, is communities, to operate most effectively. So it will be more, it won't be it doesn't need to be like terrifically kind of tailored towards one or the other, because there's similar kind of use cases for both, which is, and the two that are covered in the proposal that are some of the most important are kind of the governance side. So how you're actually making decisions in those groups and how you're making sure it's accountable, how it's being broadcast to the community, all of that kind of side around governance and how you make those decisions. And the other side is this kind of product development workflow. And that kind of takes it all the way from problem sensing to the community saying, here's a problem. And then there's these 10 community members that says, this is the most important problem, helping to get that kind of prioritization, all the way through to assigning it to looking at potential solutions, through to actually executing it, and then learning from that kind of solution. So that whole flow of taking problems through, kind of what Nadia was kind of talking about earlier with that process. So that kind of side as well. But then it also includes a few of those kind of extra things as well, like communication, long form content. Those things will be probably less substantial in what we need to do here, but they will still be an important part of this kind of overall. This is how we kind of initially will work together, and then over to you. It's up to you guys how you want to kind of change and evolve that. Any more for any more? Is that fairly?
It's definitely getting clearer. Thank you.
Slow and steady. Yeah. So let's say, have I kind of covered most of this as well? So yeah, so to take it through from this kind of proposal that we've made into this, the idea is it's going to be aimed to be a really kind of collaborative effort. Like there's not, I've kind of started it and then suggested and reached out to a lot of different people when they've joined in to help. The idea is that people can take chunks off this, do some, as like the first start, for instance, there's an easy example. You could have someone's looking at communication tools, both like Web 2, Web 3. That's the more maybe of the kind of different areas. That might be one of the easier ones. They may come with a list of here's some kind of options we have, and then present that, and then people go, yeah, that seems great. You might have missed a few things, and you can take that small unit of work and offer that contribution to then lead to this, and then take the aggregate of all the different areas, the research, then the requirements, to get to this kind of end result of, okay, this is kind of a good initial setup. And in each of the stages, the idea is we'll kind of do quite a few of these after town halls, sharing in the Telegram chats, trying to get feedback at every step, because at the end of the day, a lot of people who are active here and right here now are probably really good candidates for being contributors. So I imagine people will have plenty of opinions on it. So it should definitely not be a 1 or 2 or 3 person kind of, oh, this is how we're doing things. So that's the intention and kind of the process we're looking to do. Things like the first kind of steps to it will be kind of these research and requirements. And for both of those, they can kind of be done in parallel, actually. So people can be researching different things we can use. And on the other side, we can look at like, what do we actually need? And we'll be going back and forth on that. These kind of initial areas I've got noted down are the communication. So that's the thing like, Zoom, Discord, anything else that's going on out there that might be useful. This is the more easy one that shouldn't take as much time. The governance side, which will definitely take more time. For instance, it would be great to have credentials in a voting system or a Tyler Prism, but that's obviously going to come down in the future. We'll be looking at ways that we can kind of achieve the same things with existing solutions. We can even consider other chains, and because at the end of the day, we just need a solution to the problem here, for that interim time. So, and it's also kind of the experience of doing it will give you those contributors all of that context to know like what actually needs to be built when you actually put in all the effort, because when you go to the technical side, it obviously becomes much more of a commitment to do something. So it's good to have that experience. So the governance side will be looking at much more on these kind of Web3 sides. Long form content, we've got things like this more long form collaboration thing. I think that's the thing that we've kind of missed a bit on in Catalyst at the moment. We've got plenty of these kind of chats, these short form communications that goes on quite well, but we've not really got a great kind of place for more long form. So the easy example here would be something like discourse. So forum.cardano.org is an example of that. That's discourse, and that's kind of like a long form communication option. And what that would be useful for is, it's hard to make these decisions really quickly, like how contributors work and changing things in Catalyst. There's going to be a lot of back and forth debate, like and that's a good part of making a good decision. So that's that one, trying to kind of see what we could use for that, to kind of bring that into the process. And part of that for contributors as well is they want to have something where, you know, it's easy for the wider community just to get involved and, you know, give their feedback and that kind of thing as well. Then product development. So if anyone who's been a designer, software, or anything like that, you probably use things like Jira and these kind of flows where you can kind of go through from problem prioritization to assigning it to someone, all that kind of flow. This will be looking at areas in that. So there's a few things we have like GitHub, Jira. The kind of things we'll be looking for is how can we make sure that process is open as possible. Like we don't want it to be like a closed door process where it's like, oh, the Catalyst contributors are just like doing their own thing and it's all a hidden process. The things we'll be looking for there is how can we make it really open and easy to kind of follow and maybe like submit for problems to and maybe, you know, prioritize them, or that it's easy to, let's say 100 people who in the community want to upvote a certain problem. So it's really, really clear, this is the biggest problem. All of those things are kind of part of that one. And then the final one is just treasury management, which is just kind of like whether it's a multi-sig or something like Gnosis Safe on Ethereum. That's looking at how can we have a kind of treasury pot for the Catalyst contributors and Cardano contributors to help kind of like delegate, you know, parts of funding to get things, you know, get things done. Maybe there's a extra development tool that could be really good for Catalyst, and the Catalyst contributors don't have the capacity for it, but you know, they know what they need, so they have some funding and they go, okay, well, we can fill that in with a contractor, or you know, we can pay for another contributor for like 6 months. They can be more malleable and flexible to be like knowing their requirements and then kind of using treasury management, and obviously the governance will come into this as well, as making a vote and saying this would be super valuable, and then exercising on that and actually being able to fund things to speed up that evolution and, you know, make sure you have that kind of movement of capital to where it's needed. So I'll stop there. That's kind of the most important starting things I think they need. There are obviously there's tons of things we could, you know, you could include into this infrastructure kind of starting point. For instance, you know, like a calendar tool would be really useful for, you know, Catalyst contributors to help kind of manage stuff within all the events. And you could include that as well, but it's like, it's less important than these kind of starting blocks. And I think this is the thing that Tommy mentioned in the Catalyst, the community advisor Telegram earlier, which is a good thing that I'd love to get everyone's opinion on, is scope. Is just like trying to work out where to start and stop this proposal and the things that we need to do, or you know, the priority of the things we need to do. And then where, you know, where we're going to draw the line and say, you know, if we can do these, great. If we can't, it's not a big issue. But some examples of those things are like design tools, software libraries and SDKs, it's things that you're going to be using on the, you know, to actually kind of change stuff. The calendar is kind of like the more usage of a service. One that I think is worth adding on here that I think is actually a really good contender, actually, one that Tommy's looked at a little bit, is things like vision and mission. So like, what is the purpose, the actual mission of Catalyst contributors and Cardano contributors? Having that really well defined, I think is a really good thing to do fairly early, you know, fairly on. So that might be something to add on to this potentially. Because then when people are applying to be a Catalyst contributor, it's really clear, it's like, this is this is kind of what I'm applying to do. Like this is the mission behind this kind of this entity of collection of people who are working towards something. Does that make some sense? So everyone, if you want to raise your hands and throw some questions over, because you know this is very open on exactly the things we include and exclude, and how we group them as well. Andra.
I was wondering if the governance itself includes the vision mission you mentioned, because what pops in my head is kind of the transformation part of what you are doing. So when you start with vision mission, for me, it's also strategizing, road mapping, and this kind of stuff. So I was wondering if it, in your description, if it fits into the governance.
Initially, from my initial thoughts, it didn't, but it could. I think it almost warrants its own kind of box, because it's kind of like it's kind of like qualitative kind of thing. Whereas when I was thinking of governance, just because of the nature of who I am, I think very functional. So all these 5 things are generally very functional. It's kind of like that kind of functional layer for the contributors. Whereas this mission and values side isn't necessarily too functional. So there's that kind of nice divide. But yeah, the governance side that I was really thinking about is like how we are actually, you know, those contributors are coming together to actually make a decision, and how are they making the vote? How is that vote, the data for that vote exported? You know, things about making sure it's accountable, so we know for sure that that person who's voted is actually that contributor, how we can kind of verify it in some way, and what's the best solution that we have at our disposal on the market that facilitates that. So it was more of a functional side, but yeah, there is some overlap, I guess, between that and.
But splitting it makes a lot of sense as well. The question is if you want to have it into the main boxes or not, right?
Yeah. Definitely the thing I worry about is capacity. The things I think will be the time-consuming stuff is the product development and the governance research requirements and going through the other ones. I think there might be less things to find and less kind of decisions to make, but those two I feel are going to be a lot more chunky. So because of the proposal scope, I obviously don't want to, I'm scared of being like, oh, let's just do everything. It's definitely not practical. And there's obviously certain things that the contributors can do from day one, we've only got a certain amount of time. So yeah. Jonathan.
Hello. So how do we pull the sort of decision-making, the consensus that we reach within Catalyst, voting obviously, into contributors? Like how do we direct contributors, or is it purely an internal direction thing? If we're deciding on, if there are decisions being made on what we're building out next, how is that decision being made? Who's responsible for it? We've got openness and transparency and auditing perhaps, but there needs to be a directional aspect to it all as well.
So you mean the decision making for this proposal itself, as in how we deciding which things are used, rather than the end result? Is that what you mean?
As in, okay, proposal gets through, we adopt some contributors. How do we decide what they're doing? Like, for Catalyst has voting, Cardano doesn't have voting. Where's the input into this effectively highly effective or highly diverse team of builders? And it's like a small enterprise almost, or maybe a large enterprise. And in that enterprise, the direction comes from either client demands or director's vision. So where does this touch ground with our voting community or our
So this is I guess there's two kind of sides to that. There's these kind of like things that are like everyone kind of knows needs to be done, such as like assessments on proposal. There's these kind of things that we know those things need to be done for Catalyst to function. And then in terms of actually changing stuff and solving problems that people are bringing in, it is really probably going to come all under the product development kind of side. Is like that top part of the funnel is like how is the community interacting and pushing everything that's feedback, problems, all of that. And that part is so important, because it's just like it needs to be really easy for the community to do it, to add it. And the Catalyst contributors or Cardano contributors also need a way to prioritize that, because you could get it's quite easy with Catalyst. You get a ton of things on that list that need to change. So how do you go through that? And so this is another thing that I think will be come onto these requirements thing, is like, well, it would be it must have these things, but it would be really nice to have a way for people to be like upvote, downvote, or like be able to say which things they think are the most important problems in some way. So I think that's
sort of the Catalyst circle as the sensor array, and with these subcircles forming, and that's kind of creating the sensing layer, and maybe that's where it feeds into the contributors layer. But actually, we've got sensing body, and we've got now a functional body that does the building, does this stuff.
I would be happy to take signal from there. I'd also be happy to have signal coming from a bunch of people that are right here.
Yeah, polls, sensing straight into after town halls and that sort of thing.
Yeah, they could work obviously completely in parallel. You could obviously have these subcircles that are just responsible for, because like for instance, the product development workflow, there's so many kind of parts to Catalyst. You wouldn't put everything on the same board really, because otherwise you just bloat. It'd be madness. So you're gonna have like functional areas, and then a subcircle could just be like, we just help and run that kind of board. So as well as people being openly kind of going into it, and if they want to, you could also have that kind of these kind of subcircles helping to actually prioritize them, go talk to communities actively themselves to bring in problems that they're trying to work out, and well defined. I think it'll be a mixture of efforts, I guess. There's no right or wrong way for problems to come in. It's just a case of whatever is effective, because like we can't guarantee that everyone in Catalyst spends the time to submit problems. It might have to be a bit of a initiated effort from contributors or subcircles to really gather that information. Both is fine, as long as it's open to all of it. I think that's definitely a main thing.
Cool.
And wasn't it so that you had proposed a challenge where people could then suggest what they want to work on, right?
Say again. So suggest a challenge.
Like these contributors, they choose that I want to bring this kind of role into Catalyst and I want to focus on that, right?
Yeah, they pick their own roles. So the reason that roles is a part of contributor stuff is that some roles have been defined. Let's say it's design, development, product, certain things are pretty common in current kind of businesses and organizations. And the reason you kind of need those is because, let's say, we want to hire 50 contributors. You don't want to have all of them be coordination or all of them to be development. You want to have this kind of mix of talent to facilitate everything that needs to get done. So the only kind of requirement we added into the contributors kind of documentation is, if you go for one of these roles, you should at least be doing that at least half the time. And we want it to be as flexible as possible. So if you're really excited to work on something else, like you're a developer, but you want to do a bit of design work, and you're super excited about that, I think that's one of the joys of this model, is you can be a lot more flexible, but there should definitely be some requirement that at least you're covering at least 50%. So then all these kind of responsibilities of these kind of people are covered. So there would be some flexibility, but I think there's obviously it has to be a little bit of rigidity to make sure that it's functional. And they would be kind of contributors themselves can come forward with ideas, problems, and ways to solve things, as well as the community. It'll be literally the whole kind of board of approaches, but they are accountable for what they decide to work on. So if they had an idea themselves that they thought was more important than what the community were saying, they could do that, but it's going to be an accountable voted decision by them that they're saying this is more important, here's the reasons why. And then obviously you live and by the decisions you make, kind of thing. Is that's the kind of standard accountability. It's like that's what you kind of delegate. You choose people to do. You're saying this person is very professional at this. I trust their judgment to, when given a set of problems and the information, to make well-informed decisions on what to do. So there'll always be some form of delegation of them having control over what they actually work on, because
I don't know where this is coming from, but I have this really stupid example in my head that, let's say that we have budget for 100 people to blow balloons, and there's 99 people who want to blow pink balloons and one person who wants to blow blue balloons, but we actually need 50 people blowing blue balloons and only 50 people pink balloons. So should we here in this infrastructure analysis provide some framework or guidelines or selection process for these people, or how do we rate that this person is better in blowing pink balloons than the other one, or how do we recognize that there's this one guy who is actually ready to say that, guys, stop, we don't need any more balloons, but we need to do something else?
There's kind of two things there. There's one thing that is at the moment TBC on the documentation, and that is this kind of let's say there's something like 1 million and a bit odd for Catalyst contributors that's part of the budget weighting vote. What percentage of that should be development, design, product? The first kind of thing is how do we democratically decide what distribution it is? At the moment, I was going to add something on the weekend and then share it and start to kind of get feedback on that, because it does need to be done soon. And then the second thing, like you were talking about there, is when they are kind of hired as contributors, we need to some sort of review process. There needs to be something in place to be how do you know whether someone's been excellent or good or okay? How do you make sure you kind of track those things? Doing some progress reports and the auditing is a start, but I think this is a future it's probably not a problem to solve immediately, but it's something that needs to be done, so we can actually have a way to know that this contributor is absolutely exceptional. but that will take some different ways, different thoughts and different things to be like how we actually tracking this, because you don't want to make it like you don't want to rush that, because then you could have like a system where it's kind of gamed in one way where it's not actually a meaningful thing. But if people do that thing, then they're seen as, the godlike contributor, which is not what we want. It needs a lot of delicate thought. Andre, I think, was next.
I'm thinking there is a lot of problems in traditional businesses with people who are in management, who are responsible for like CEOs or people who have the power. They are very often making decisions which they do not know much about. And this is a problem which can be easily replicated with this kind of a decentralized environment. So I'm thinking, when you are saying we will tell how many people will blow 50 blue balloons and how many people will blow yellow balloons, I'm thinking that you should think about this on different levels. You should be able to determine on conceptual level what you want to achieve, and give this to the teams which you are having under, and they should be the ones who determine what kind of people they will be needing. There is something like circle of excellence, or this kind of concept where you have a charter of the circle, and the charter says what they are about to, and how kind of what people they need, and how they organize themselves, what kind of data and information they have. So it will be continuous. If somebody leaves, you will have somebody new. And that way you will be able to achieve the thing that the team itself will be able to determine who they need, and there will be also control, because you will have kind of a conceptual level or logical level, depends how you will be looking at it, and on that level you will be able to tell if they are doing a good job or not.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that's kind of like a process thing that it is really worth considering, because let's say there's 50 Catalyst contributors, and there's it makes sense that there's 8 people working on in auditability and auditing per se. If this is something that we could try to define roughly now, to be like, okay, here's the kind of different areas of Catalyst, and roughly we think about 5 people should be about here, 10 people should be about here. So that adds some formality to kind of like where you might spend most of your time, which has its pros and cons, because some people would like to spend time in a mixture of areas, and some might just want to stay in a single area. So there's obviously a lot of conversation on that one. I don't know, because it's very subjective. It's kind of like how do people prefer to work? This is the kind of thing that excited me when I was working on stuff in Fund 3, thinking about how the future of work is like. The idea of flexibility is very powerful, I think, in like if you're interested in some specific thing, suddenly you should have the agency to be able to do that and do it well, and if you compensate for it, basically, and that's very powerful. So the thing I would worry about is if we had this kind of, we could have guidelines maybe, but if it was more like rules, I'd be concerned about how it's perceived, how it's followed. But there is merit to it, because it can bring more structure to that organization.
Guidelines, metrics, and perhaps some kind of idea of future state. What you think they want should be the result on more conceptual level, and it's up to them to do the work on the detail. Just I'm not saying do it like that. I'm just putting out ideas from my experience.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. I feel it's the thing that is very close to. It's a very good contender to include into this infrastructure kind of analysis, because it's like just having some bare bones of ways to, here's how stuff you're going to use, just go nuts. But here's just a suggestion on how to kind of organize yourselves, how to think about metrics, how to think about that kind of things, so you can actually demonstrate that things are actually going as planned. So I think more thought needs to be done on that. I've not thought about it too much, as you can tell. But that's great.
I've been doing quite a fair bit of thinking about those kinds of things. And when the time is right, I am prepared to screen share. I see Michael though.
I mean, that would sound great. Michael, please.
Hi there. My question kind of follows on Andres, actually. The focus areas, I'm just kind of wondering what the purpose of the focus areas are. Are they kind of more generically just describing the scope of this initiative, or are they a little bit more formally like functional areas that people would be specifically assigned to, or are they kind of more just like attractors, sort of attract points? And I'm asking because I'm not clear of the difference between communication and long form content, and maybe it doesn't matter. Okay, that's my question.
Yeah. So yeah, they definitely were more functional from the starting point. For instance, yeah, the mission and values and that kind of process side is definitely like that more less functional side that is something that's also really valuable that hasn't been included here. But my intention with it wasn't necessarily to be that it has to be functional. Like I didn't have any strong opinions on that. I'm very loose on what is exactly we do. It's just the thing I'm trying to work out is that we do the things that will have the most impact, so then they have a really good starting point. And then the small, less important things, like the calendar or these little things, but they can do that when they start and they can set that up. But it's mainly just what are these main things we think are important. And I think that the process thing is a really good suggestion. I think the mission and values is a good area to think about. It's just trying to get as much feedback as we can, and that's what this kind of chat was about. Just seeing, is there anything else we know that we definitely need to try and think about for this first cohort, so they're off to the races.
Okay, thanks.
Before Randall gives us a screen share, which I hope he has permissions to, I've been made a co-host. I think you better do it. Hopefully. Does anyone else have anything else? So we have this kind of like 5 functional areas, and actually quickly to reply to what you said, Michael. So the communication is much more like short form, snappy, quick. Just you're there live in the moment, or it's that kind of communication. Whereas the long form is much more kind of written out, purposeful, just kind of like you can come back to it after a week kind of thing, and it's still going. It's like, whereas chat, you don't really go up a few weeks in chat kind of thing. So that was the kind of difference. It's kind of short form and
okay. I'll just say, because I was thinking more a different division would be development communication and implementation communication kind of thing.
Yeah. There's be some thought for that. Yeah, like this. So and even the groupings I've made at the moment aren't really like a formal thing. They're just kind of like indication. So
okay.
maybe they change. Like I always like to make a quick, colorful sketched rectangle when I'm showing off things, but it never means it's official. I'm just making a cheap image.
Nice colors, by the way.
I love making those cheap images to show things.
Is that screen share coming through?
Oh yeah.
Sweet. And let me just get rid of that chat window. Okay, good. So I've been working on some of the problems that we've been talking through with regard to mission setting and central point of reference for goals and objectives. And what you're looking at on screen is basically what I've been doing is capturing the conversation. And I started this, right here during this call. And just to put this in context, we could look at the plan for Gimbal Labs or ADAO or any other organization in this organizational manageability tool. Right now, I've selected the Cardano contributors project. And on this main organizational operating system tab, we see this mission statement that I typed in, just synthesized from our conversation, and a goal and objective. We can add more goals, objectives, metrics, practices, and constraints. And I'll back out of that. I also captured a cultural element of value of accountability. We value accountability in the way we spend this budget. On the left, I've added 2 groups, community contributors and catalyst contributors. And these groups provide a place to hang specific project proposals that would be serving those individual groups. I'll just type in a short description here. And because I want to show that although we can go ahead and create execution elements within the group, we can also drill into that project proposal and define specific goals, etc., for that project. And of course, we'll be able to type more information about the project plan. And I believe that's going to end up going down here in this area of the screen. And I would very much like to make this tool available for this group to start administering the kind of process that George introduced.
Yeah, to add, I think we're going to this tool and anything that's kind of community driven is going to be so valuable for us to test things that are more Web3. Like there's a lot of Web2 solutions that we're going to find in this research, and there's going to be those sticking points where we can't, let's say we have the first version of a Tyler Prism where we've got a holders wallet, this, that, or the other, and to get them to integrate with existing, let's say Discord or something like that, is going to be certain Web2 solutions is going to be very difficult. So having finding and what Randall's been working on, or others, or this kind of thing that's community driven, are going to be so valuable for us to exploring some of the more complex sides of things to do with governance decisions, accountability, the treasury management stuff, like actually extracting that information out and having it somewhere that's reliable and people can trust, and all of those sides that become really important over time as things start to grow. So yeah, it's super exciting to see some of these initiatives.
And one thing that's not evident on screen yet is a roadmap where people can actually use the application that you're seeing to express their preference between two proposals, or just express support for a particular proposal or a person that is providing a contribution related to that proposal. And so in this group, we might propose that for the Cardano community that there'd be a tools project. And we might propose that there is also a consulting architect project, or just consultants project. And then within those projects, there might be roles that people use, just some contribution tokens, some tokens that we make up ourselves and mint, or maybe we just use the Gimbal Labs Gimbal token for it, and drop those tokens into those proposals or into those proposed roles, and use them to express the signaling about our preferences and our support for, and that essentially would be the construction of a governance process that we can do here in a sandbox for the contributors project.
Yeah, I think this is one of the key things that we'll be looking for, is how contributors will want to be able to experiment with things and just have something to play with. And similar to what some of the identity guys are doing, some of these initial identity solutions, initial kind of collaboration platforms like this, all of them are going to be so useful for them to play around with. And that's probably a key thing to say, really, actually, with this infrastructure stuff, is the idea is it is not in any way static or fixed. This will change. What they use and what they play around with will be changing, like potentially on a weekly to monthly basis. Like they're always going to be trying something, because at the end of the day, their requirements will change and things they need to help with, and the requirements of let's say 30 people contributors and 50 people and 100 people and 1,000, or I mean, I don't know if it gets that big, but the numbers really do change things. Just like if people have worked in a 5-10 person startup or a 50 person one, you can see the dynamics are so different, and it'll be the same thing for contributors. So the only thing we can expect is change. Scott.
I just wanted to, at the nudging from a couple of people in here, just wanted to suggest another platform is DWork. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's mostly, I think it started off mainly focused on the Ethereum communities. It's for DAOs and organizations. Community, you can set up different project boards for your various, back on your GitHub, or I'm sorry, on your Gitbook, for the various areas of your project or your proposal. You can set up different project boards. It's just like, it's similar to Kanban, but you also, community can put their suggestions in there. Suggestions can be upvoted by the community members. They can remove their votes. You just can't downvote it, so you can upvote it. It also has Discord and GitHub integration, which is pretty slick. So anytime somebody puts a suggestion in there, it'll create a thread in Discord. It would open up the topic for discussion. And then also it can create an issue or archive it in GitHub, however you want to utilize the GitHub integration on it. Right now we have 3 working groups in the CA Hub, the Discord that we set up for the Circle Rep. And so that's part of the process that we're using. The community suggestions will be in its own board. Once you'll have your steward or your moderator, whoever, your lead, or maybe a group of leads that will look through the suggestions, pick them out, put them in the to-do, move them over to to-do, and then the other working groups can decide, does this fall into our working group? And they'll move that task over to their board and then continue working on it. And there's also, within the working groups, they can, within the working group project boards, the team that are part of that working group can also upvote those particular to-do tasks. So what's more important, what's priority, and then they can do it that way. So it's just another tool. It's not a be-all, end-all, but it does have some pretty cool integrations that allow for communications and discussion throughout the community or members of the community.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. Yeah, these are all the kind of things we need to add and compare to kind of gauge what makes sense. That's the thing. So yeah, if you message that in the chat, I will definitely DWork. Yeah, hopefully it's easy to find online.
I can put it. Yeah, I can put a link to the to this particular one, because I think we're probably the only one in Cardano that's using DWork.
.xyz.
DWork looks like it's got some of these other really cool features that Scott was describing, and the way it shows up on screen looks like essentially a Kanban tool, task management.
How does the token side of things tap into it, Scott?
Into what in particular, as far as payments or incentives?
Yeah.
Well, I talked to the founders of the platform, and right now there's they don't have integration for Cardano native tokens of any sort. They don't have a wallet. There's no wallet integration. It's something they're willing to look at, but it's something they won't put the time into unless there's more interest and more use on the platform, according to the
Fund 9 proposal.
Yeah. Right. So that came from the founders, and there's some other cool integrations that they're working on, not necessarily specific to Cardano, but specific to actual workflow, to where people can create tasks and issues and suggestions straight from Discord, and it will go over to DWork instead of having to go to DWork and then it populate on Discord. So, but I've asked them, that was my first question when I looked at the platform, was how to integrate Cardano or any type of native token. And unless there's a universal wallet, like MetaMask or something that has Cardano integration into it, and I don't know if it does, that might be an option. So it just depends. I'm not a developer, so.
There's probably a route through to it now, isn't there, with Milk Commodore or Wing Riders or something, but yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, I would say whatever the integration is, that it'd be easy for people to use it and not have to use bridges and everything else to make a transaction. That, yes.
You just get
Can I
Randall
just
bounties
can I
on his.
can I comment on that quickly? So there's a bunch of these new projects that are launching, and they have whatever airdrops, and it's kind of mindless distribution of tokens sometimes. And sometimes they tell the people that, okay, if you're active in our community, then we'll give you an airdrop 3 months down the line. But what does it mean that you're active? Like, it has led to situation that people just go to Discord and they just write something there to show that they're active. But with this kind of approach, we could actually see, like, what do people do, how they are active, what is their contribution, and we could track that over a year, and then there could be an airdrop based on that. So I think there's definitely room for 1 or 2 catalyst proposals there. If not Fund 9, then maybe later.
Yeah, that's actually the model that I've been thinking about using for Done Collectively as well. We want to make a platform that's effective for any DAO on Cardano, or maybe even beyond Cardano, to engage with people using principles like that. Thanks for that.
Nadia.
I'm going to say what's probably obvious, but I think is really important here, and that is that the step up into the use of this is probably one of the key considerations, because all of us who are here have made that bridge, but we're probably not representative of the amount of people who have come to Catalyst aiming to contribute in some way, who have been found themselves maybe dejected by not really being able to navigate the newness or complexity of tools. Even a tool being new can make it complex if the tool itself is simple. So this is a really, I think, important part of this conversation. We should be able, with whatever we build and whatever we use, to be able to have it be so straightforward and so easy to explain. I think we need a really important part of this is a representative group that is I don't like tools. I don't want to hear about Discord. I don't really care about that. I didn't do Facebook even at all, like people who are just, because that's a really important part of the conversation, an important part of the population. It took actually a while. I'm kind of one of those people, and it took a long time for Scott to get me to like really adhere to the idea of D-work, even though it is so easily understandable for most people who work in these environments. It solves a lot of these things that are obvious to us because we're here. But, a lot of people would rather have a Google form. Can I just type my name in? And so that beginning part of the platform has to be very shallow so that people can find their way up into being able to do some of these more complicated things. Maybe not for a developer, but maybe also. So I think it's important in this process that we get a group together that is like the representative of brand new to Catalyst, brand new to blockchain, brand new to a lot of these tools, and then what is their perception as we develop this, and what are their suggestions so that we don't alienate probably a very large part of the population of users by not having that constructed with that in mind. PS D-work I think is fantastic. D-work for us solved the issue of, we have a population of people in CAs and VCAs who is comfortable with Discord mostly. So the ability to raise that issue, like we have all these issues now, and have it populate and then let people talk about it and then let that repopulate back into D-work and archive into GitHub. It just built that initial bridge. But like Scott said, I think we see how that's adopted, and then there probably in a month from now will be some other magical tool that does similar things. But it really is a good beginning, and I think takes into account the needs of our group. Specifically. So maybe something that's easily deployable. And that was our hope, that we'd make a model that could be deployed by other groups easily. We learn about what those initial questions and objections are in the beginning. So yeah, excited to be here.
Yeah, I'd definitely continue on that. There's sometimes there's gonna be like simplicity is always like, I mean, I'm definitely like a simplicity maximalist as it comes to the categories and that kind of thing. So says no more than that. But then sometimes with the products, it's like, yeah, sometimes there's kind of contrast. You got something that's simple, but they're not fully featured, and then something's more complex, but it does what you need to. And it's like, what's the simplest thing we can do that does everything that we need to? And I think that is definitely a goal that I hope we can strive for. And yeah, like, I mean, I've not seen this D-work thing, so I'm looking forward to going through that as amongst everything else that's out there. Who hasn't given Ken, Dimitri, Jude? Is there anyone else who hasn't spoken yet that has any perspectives?
Hey, can I just mention something again? And it's not just about D-work, but I think like the tools, whatever tools we use, I think the more they can integrate and the more they can, like, you can collaborate between tools and use them. Like people use Google Docs when they're using, when they're sharing information, you can use that in Discord, but the more integration we have instead of like one-off platforms, and there needs to be that bridge, I guess, between tools in some form or fashion to where they can be utilized properly. And I don't think we need to build everything that we use. I don't think everything needs to be on Cardano or built by Cardano. I think we use the tools that we have. And then if they don't fit our needs, then we build out what we need to. Yeah. Sorry, it's just my.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. That was it. I think it's, yeah, there's actually a line in the proposal that says that. It's like, this is not intended to be like, we're not trying to build new stuff here. We're trying to really research, understand what is there, and try and make the best educated decisions on, this is a really good starting point. And then naturally it's going to change over time, and we're going to, make a mistake somewhere. We might be, if we get 89% right on like what the requirements were and get something that works, then that's a success to me, because it's going to be impossible to get 100% right. And also the requirements will change pretty quickly. But I think, let's say it's simplicity, but I think integrations is another thing. It's like, we don't want to have like 5 separate logins where it's like, I mean, there's going to be a case where you might have to have 2 or 3 or something like that. But to have, if you're getting to 6, 7, 8, you probably go down the wrong path. Like, and there's never going to be a perfect solution, or even 2 solutions. It'll be like, there'll always be a compromise between letting something go and accepting something coming in. But yeah, great points. But yeah, Henry, Jude, Mr. Blue. I don't know who Mr. Blue is. I'd love to know who Mr. Blue is. If anyone else wants to, Daniel, you just joined, I think. I don't know if you were here earlier. If anyone has any perspectives on this kind of distributed working that everyone's doing at the moment.
Yeah, well, I like these tools that people are talking about. I haven't heard of D-work yet. I'm gonna look at that because I've been talking to other people about similar things. Anyway, I had a question from earlier that popped into my head. I was wondering if I could ask the group, what areas are most ripe right now for, if we had a group, if we had Catalyst contributors, what should they be doing, and where could we use essentially manpower or human power toward this in this system? So like, if we had people who are capable and available, where should we be pointing them to? Stuff like that.
Yeah. So it would be across the board, really. So I mean, for instance, there's the auditability side. I have a proposal funded for that, for making that kind of tool. There's the thing that I really would like the Catalyst contributors and Cardano contributors to become over time is more of a democratic authoritative source, which the community is kind of somewhat lacking at the moment. Like, to have actually, we can give them some responsibility, like such as you manage the documentation and you're like the official source of documentation. That's a really good entry starting point for responsibility, because at the moment there's not like a really clear way from IOG doing work to the kind of community taking that over. And the reason why I really prefer like contributors as a model instead of proposal-driven one is the proposal-driven one is very competitive by nature and makes separate groups to try and manage what should be much more of an aligned process. And what contributors doesn't do is it doesn't mean that you can't have those teams. You could have 4 teams, but it just means their incentives model is different. They're paid as individuals that can naturally form and join groups as they want. The only thing they are worried about is delivery. And I think that's the kind of key thing. So they could work across, whether it's auditing, the idea, insights thing. It's just whatever's the highest priority. And I think that's something at the end of it, we might start putting in some of those problems from the catalyst circle and things like that into these, the product development workflow. Maybe we join up with there won't be a terrific amount of value in having 3 separate product boards for the same set of problems. There will be collaboration. I'll be talking to Stephen for sure and whoever's involved to kind of look at and compare these things and trying to think about what makes sense. And then, it's just a case of whatever the community and those contributors thinks at that time is the most high priority. I mean, there's loads of things I can think of that, that I'd like to work on or that could be done, but once we have them in a list and the contributors are kind of high, they can start to pick and choose what makes sense.
Yeah. There's definitely plenty to do around here, so no lack in things to do. It's just who's going to do it and who's going to get compensated to do it most of the time.
Yeah, I feel that is an interesting thing that I'm gonna note that down is something we could do as part of this is to kind of have that initial to make sure we migrate or it's a responsibility of this kind of work maybe to make sure we have those initial kind of problem sensing included in the setup so it's ready from the get-go. I think that's a good thing to kind of have as a goal. So these are it fulfills the kind of idea behind this proposal, which is just to give them a good starting point, and it's like off you go to the races. Nadia.
It's an interesting thing. One of the things that we talked about, so Tommy, a lot of the subcircle vision came from Tommy and Simon and Jeremy, and sort of a group got together a while back before Fund. It's like sort of in the aftermath of Fund 7, early Fund 8. And we started to talk about how would we, without creating permanence of roles, how do we let people rise into roles and then leave them based on need, but also how do we do that top down so that we're not always reactionary. And I think for the interesting thing about being compensated, to Peter's point, is like that has to be a big part of this conversation as well, because we need to think about the avenues for that beyond maybe the obvious, which is you can do proposals. So that's an interesting part of this conversation, because then we ended up thinking, which is the outcome of this initiative subcircle, is the first round of trying this out is a volunteer one, but that group is then tasked with figuring those potentials out. What can we create? Is it specific to a project being accomplished? Is it a role that forms for a fun period of time? How do we start to think about those things? And so perhaps in this, as we consider and put these things together, we come into it with that mindset of also analyzing how everything is, how people end up getting compensated, what the expenses of these tools are, so that there's an expectation of staging compensation for value. A really important part here. I know a lot of us, because we get enthusiastic, we're like, well, we'll just do it forever. It's okay. But then at a certain point, no matter how excited you are about something, either it's not sustainable if you leave it, or you come to a point where your life happens and you have a different intention. So perhaps that is part of this discussion here in a strong way as well, so that we can figure out how to move things in that direction too.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's just like these subcircles are kind of like these kind of more processy driven side things that kind of have a it's like this overall mission that maybe Catalyst has, but then there's sub missions, and they're very complementary, because there's these working groups that are solving specific things. They just need to have a way to work on that thing, to have to make for every little thing. Maybe they're doing 5 separate things. For them have to make 5 separate proposals, or 3 to represent 5, or whatever, is just this quite laborious process to do something that could be very obviously valuable. And these are the kind of perfect things for contributors, is those things that's like, we know we need to do work in auditing, we know we need to do work on improving the proposal quality and giving, maybe improving the structure, whatever, all these different things. These obvious things that people can work on that improve the overall process. They shouldn't have to do proposals every 3 months for it. So I think the sub-circle and all that kind of all the work that's going on there matches well up. And that's the thing, like, for instance, let's say the CA is like a CA sub-circle. They just get hired as Catalyst contributors. They don't need to use what we're suggesting in this proposal at all. If they've already got a working stuff, what they want to use, great. That's another experiment. It's, we're learning from what you're doing, and someone else is doing something different. Because then we're doing in parallel work. There's 2 groups. Which one's more effective? So there'd be no obligation if a team, let's say we make some stuff that's like, and the thing is, it's also just like a resource of what we make. It's kind of like, here's all the things you could use, and why we've chosen to use these. Some people are going to come in and be like, I disagree. I'd rather use this. And maybe 5 of them who are hired as Catalyst contributors or Cardano contributors just start working on that on a specific problem, and they use some different tool. Fine. Like they're accountable for their own decisions and what they want to do, as long as they're happy with doing that and that makes sense for them. Fantastic. Because then we all learn. We all get to see, and there's always going to be a new tool out there. So that's the great thing with contributors thing is you're the most in the most flexible state you can be. And it's the big problem I've had with being funded for proposals is a lot of the proposals I've been funded for are going to be reallocated to Catalyst contributors, because the environment for how I'm being boxed in to do this isn't one of collaboration. It's one of like me doing something and just delivering it. Hey, here you go, Catalyst. Like, use this. It's like, it doesn't incentivize the right behaviors. Whereas the Catalyst contributors, just hire me as someone who's good at design or development or whatever. I can move between these groups that I'm seeing as more or less effective. And doing all these experiments, it's like, I know I could be really valuable here, and I can just go to, I don't need to do a proposal. I don't need to, return or reallocate funding, all these kind of things. I can just be like, boom, I'm working here now. Like, they need me, I can be valuable. And this sub-circle's the circle for me for 6 months, because there's a super cool project that I want to work on. That flexibility is key. And as soon as people have got the compensation sorted, so they can just like, my full time is for this, great. Like, so yeah, I think that's a really good point to make, is like, even though we're going to pick some kind of starting point for, like, let's say the whole cohort, is the research itself is really important for being like, here are all the different options and stuff, and you can change to those things as a whole collective or as a sub collective, and those choices are yours. We've just tried to make it like easier to kind of see what things are out there, why you might use it, the context of when you might use one over the other. There's only so much depth we were to go into, obviously, but the better we can do that, the more people are going to be like, have their different opinions, try things, and just learn, basically.
George, I'm very grateful to you for this initiative, because it raises the issue of valuing people who have been falling through the cracks in the system. I am one of those people.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's being, I think a lot of us who know it, like being part of since like, fund 1, 2, 3, whatever we started. It's very, with a proposal process, it can be very easy to miss 4 months salary, or so, like, you can be working for a certain amount of time, and through the existing system, you can just miss through. And it is a good add-on to kind of why I think these contributors should have like a treasury, is because sometimes, people who are funded as a contributor, let's say Catalyst contributors as a collective, there's going to be people who don't get funded, but then that it's very obvious they're adding serious value. So for them to be like, to be able to identify, here's like 5 people who fell through the cracks, and we can kind of make sure they can get funded, because like this collective votes and agrees like this is super valuable what they're doing. Let's make sure that from our part, which is a much more localized understanding, we don't expect the general ADA holder to know all of our problems. Like, that's never going to happen. But if you have this full-time set of people who are and know that inside out, having to have Catalyst, they're going to be able to spot those people who are like, that person needs some support. with the proposal process, it's really easy. It's very rigid. It's very hard to solve that problem. So starting to localize some of the treasuries in some ways will help to give that flexibility, maneuverability of funds, so we can people can identify and solve that capital problem for people that miss out for some unfortunate reasons because one assessor decided to give you one star and then you're out. The power of one assessor is crazy in Catalyst of it. So yeah, I think this is a great thought process.
So do you envision each one of your categories to be a group kind of in a team in and of itself, or multiple teams? And then how big those teams, how big can they be? And or yeah, you talked about it as like a collective with a treasury. Are there sub treasuries for each group? What are we thinking here?
So those kind of treasury things are more for these Catalyst contributors and Cardano contributors. I don't know if you were talking about the funding, the 7 funding categories. Then is that what you were talking about?
Both.
I wasn't suggesting that. I think this, and this is the thing I've been thinking about a lot with Catalyst and the categories, is I see probably a separation in exactly what challenge teams do at the moment. I see more of like a functional side, which is like, as we have category teams, it's just making sure everything's working correctly and the right things are awareness and procedures being followed. But I see some of the things that challenge teams are doing now, likely going on a layer above. Let's say there's like a DeFi alliance, and they say, we're really missing out. There's this kind of community initiative, and they really understand that part of the ecosystem. So they're really well positioned to be like, oh, here's some metrics or some initiatives or things that be super valuable that could then be applied to which proposals going through the Catalyst process meet those requirements or those metrics, or going for those metrics that could move the needle from this very well educated like initiative community group, rather than, let's say, people working on Catalyst needing to be the most like know everything, because they're not they're not going to do that.
Yeah.
They're not going to do that. So it's I see kind of how categories, how I've suggested them, as being more of a light touch of making sure they work, and then not having like separate treasuries for those. It's more just like, just like, for instance, let's say we've got this DeFi alliance thing that some of the DeFi protocols are set up. They're good candidates for having some sort of like treasury, and they're just like a communal force, because then they can spot the gaps and be like, oh, this small SDK that someone's writing could really help save this problem, and this community understands that whole environment, and then they can fill that gap. Whereas the Catalyst and Cardano contributor ones are really focused on their domains, and they specialize in that. So that the only decisions they make for moving funding around and that flexibility is for their own concern, because there's no point of them doing it for everything else, because it's just too much complexity. So does that cover it? Anyone?
That starts down the road for sure. I like what you pulled out, the 2 layers of kind of what challenge teams are doing. There's a vision component where you need to capture and kind of know the different directions a challenge could go, and then there is like a basic process. Let's make sure everyone's getting the help they need, getting heard, getting the help they need, and going and knows where to go to get their questions answered, and kind of that maintenance. So there is definitely there's different types of people are good at those 2 different types of tasks too. So that comes down into team size and how big and what types of people do you need on to make the most efficient teams, and I don't know, that's not something necessarily you would top down. Maybe it is something you'd top down, be like, these are optimal teams, and this is how we form them, and we look for people with these types of skill sets, and it's weird and it doesn't necessarily make sense to everybody on the outside, but it makes sense to all of us in here grinding.
Something you said makes me think of Quasar.
There's a lot of things bundled into challenge settings right now, and I know I will be sharing an update to that analysis soon. Brace yourself. Trying to separate the complexities of that and just try to make it simple but effective is like, I don't know if anyone saw the Bitcoin 2021 Jack Mallers, his emotional speech saying he will die on the hill, building up Bitcoin. For me, that's funding categorization. I will die on that hill. If there's one thing I need to try and change, is the damn funding categorization, followed by catalyst contributors. Those are the two things. But yeah, like there's, I'm excited for hopefully eventually the complexity to reduce on that. So then, because this is the kind of thing I see with this community, and we're going off a complete tangent here, but this community and outreach category that I see this as like the perfect contender for, I'm a gaming community or a DeFi community, but they're not necessarily builders. They're just people that really understand that niche, and they're coming together and they're hosting events, they're having discussion, they're looking at what's missing, they just live and breathe that thing, and they just get funded just to operate. Like they're super, that collective unit and community is super valuable, because like, they're living and breathing DeFi, or whatever it is, identity, or it could be very much more niche. It could be like, borrowing, lending for a certain country or whatever. Like it could be anything. But they're super valuable if they're done well, those kind of collaborative communities. Sorry, absolute tangent. Andre.
I wanted to say I really like the proposal. I think it's going in a really nice direction. And when I'm listening to you talking about this dying on the hill of categorization, there is kind of a question for the whole group. Would it be a problem if you would focus only on the categories you are certain of? Imagine, because the scope you are going in might be quite big eventually. So what if you would cut everything you would be uncertain about, and you would focus just on one category? What would you and others think about that? Because it might make it easier for you to start the action, and obviously the people will then react, okay, something is missing, but okay, I'm shutting down.
Have you read the 7 funding categories that he's talking to? Because there's also kind of like the grouping we've had in this that Git book that obviously says through these kind of 5 areas, which is to do with more the infrastructure for contributors, whereas these 7 categories are really to do with the funding categorization for how Catalyst buckets, puts things in the buckets of where you can get access to funding. And if that's definitely what you're the path you're going down, yeah, you could have that is definitely an option. You could have Catalyst contributors, because they're really ones responsible for Catalyst. You could have them responsible for, and I think that would naturally happen anyway. You'd have people who are like, help support the process and functional side of each of, whatever categorizations there are. Because they're kind of the people who work for, it's kind of working for Catalyst really. They're responsible for making sure no shenanigans are happening on across the board, and focusing on you. Let's say, I'm 80% of my time I'm doing development and some design work, but 20% of my time I'm helping out this category, and maybe it's the development and node operation, because that maybe development's my experience. I'm well tuned for spotting that this is bullshit, this looks, this makes sense, this has been copied from somewhere else, or I'd be more able to facilitate and prevent things from happening later down the line. For instance, at the moment we only really do like an identity check to see if you're an actual valid proposer at the onboarding stage. So you can have a great proposal and go through this whole process, and we only really properly check when you're about to get the onboarded onto the fund. So it's quite a late stage to do it, and there could be things we could do if someone's focused, like a contributor's more focused on a specific category where they're much better at identifying certain things. Be like, oh, this is a problem, this is an improvement, this person's not aware of these 3 initiatives that already exist that is worth sharing with them. That's the kind of thing I'm thinking about with how category teams would help facilitate that categorization. Is they would just be like awareness process, just making sure all the ducks are aligned, rather than saying, for DeFi you need to do these exact metrics, you need to do this exact thing, because it's every team's different. Like to say there's like these 5 metrics that define success for this thing, I think is not probably the right path to go down, because each project's a different stage. What metrics make sense? You can't, to put that into the categorization, the metrics and be like, this is what it has to do. It's very hard. Like you're generally just excluding people from the categorization for some arbitrary reason, generally.
And what comes up for me that's tangential to that is the notion of actually facilitating people with good proposal ideas through the development of their proposal to like show good traction against the high level idea of the challenge category, and maybe even optimize the time to launch.
Yeah, I think like if anyone's seen TiVo's workshops and stuff, that's a really good example of things that the Catalyst contributors could help with. Like, one person or two people from that cohort could, on a weekly or bi-weekly or whatever basis, be supported. Just this is a way that it's like an obvious thing that's helpful, and they can help facilitate that improvement of proposal information, making sure they've thought about the metrics right, or these certain things. So at least it's like, and especially also people who are more maybe more disadvantaged. If they like, for instance, it's easier for me to spend time on proposals and writing them to a certain quality than someone maybe in a third world country. So it's like, how can we help level the playing field? How can we make sure, it's a language thing or that kind of thing? That kind of side is a really valuable use of contributors' time to make sure, you get that kind of better balance, that better quality. Ken. Dan, I thought you were going to go there.
I was just going to say, like, you were talking about like categorizing, like one of the things that I've been studying recently is like idea mapping, because one of my proposals for this funding round is about building an idea mapping system. And so like I've been looking a lot at the Zettelkasten, and there's an app called Obsidian it's free, but it's not open source. It's free to use for personal use, but like not for organizations or something. But I was thinking about doing something similar, that's, instead of being focused on individual, like an individual building up they sort of call it like a second brain or something, where you link all your ideas together into a graph structure, but like doing that in a distributed way with collaborative abilities built into it. And like one of the things that you sort of want to avoid when you're like trying to build up like a knowledge system is premature categorization. Like you have ideas and you see how they connect together, and then the categories almost fall out of that. So like if you're structuring things and siloing things into different places, then you might miss ways that the different things link together. Like, I'm not sure if that would relate specifically to like categorizing things into funding groups, but like, I don't know, some of the ideas that we've been talking about, like figuring out what things people should be working on, like if too many people are working on one thing and there's something else that really needs to be done that people are neglecting, like there could be incentive mechanisms that make your time more valuable, spend on a task that people aren't looking at, than if you're doing the same thing that everybody else is doing. So like if you think of it as you're putting time, like say you've got a token or something that has to do with the time you're putting into something, you could have some sort of mechanism that says, okay, the people who are looking at the idea space, like if they see something that really needs to be focused on, then maybe voting up the value of the time spent on that idea or something like that. So I'm just trying to think of more like a less top-down approaches for how to guide people towards the gaps in the idea space.
Yeah, is that like helping to guide people to potentially focus on work on areas that get underserved and underviewed, like by how you're mapping it together? Is that a fair?
Yeah, well, like I'm mostly focused on like ideas. So like there's the ideation phase and catalyst, but it doesn't really do much the way things are set up now. But like what you want is to be able to map out how everything connects together and where projects are located in this idea space, and then see where there's gaps that need to be filled, or see how people's ideas fit together and what projects can grow from those ideas. But like you can use the same fundamental structures for other aspects of how you build a system. Like if you include time as a dimension in the idea space, then you can have how like the whole Kanban thing. You can build that into the system without having to add something that's not part of the fundamental structure. So like if you try to take it, like use like first principles thinking, where you distill things down into the most fundamental semantic components, and then how you can structure those together in a way that, like, where you can get all the aspects of the system that you want to get. That's sort of what I've been thinking about, because like my other project is I want to build a different programming language front end on top of Plutus core. And so in order for me to structure my ideas together for that, I need to have something that I can map out how things are connected together. Like there's several different programming languages. I want to look at the semantic properties of the languages and how the different pieces can fit together into something that's simple and easy to work with. And so that's sort of my goal for something that I want to be able to do with the idea mapping project.
It feels like a perfect thing. Let's say Catalyst contributors, they're funded and there's 40 or so of them. Because Catalyst is the perfect place where you just have literally the amount of ideas that can come into Catalyst, because it's anything in the world, is just ridiculous. A good way maybe to test this and play around with it could be to focus on something that's obviously that you don't want to maybe too broad, because then you really need a lot of content to make it, to test it. But let's say whichever was the most like interested community and maybe in doing all the most, maybe it's governance, because governance is one of those things. It's like a lot of different things, or it could be DeFi, it could be some sort of problem or topic area. And then the contributors and hopefully part of the community help promote doing mind map for that thing and just seeing how it's used, so we can because that first stage of the Catalyst process will massively benefit from ways to bring together people, as well as the interlinking of ideas, kind of thing. That it could be a very complex product, but I feel that might be a way that we could test it without being like, oh, like obviously you probably wouldn't start with, oh, everyone has to use this thing now for everything, kind of thing. But what's the first
No, like I've got plenty of notes that I'm trying to organize, to use in the system for testing purposes. Like I'm still trying to figure things out, because like I was thinking about like there's a lot of different flavors of Markdown, like as far as how you like building documents and stuff like that. like going back to the idea of making something as simple as possible to use. You don't want to have overlapping semantics where you have different features that can be used for structuring the same types of ideas if you can avoid it, because like if people have one way of, like if you have a set way of how you structure things and it works for any of the use cases, then anyone who goes into the system will see something that, like if they decide to start using the system and they want to structure something out, then they'll be using the same way of structuring things out as anyone else who uses the system, and that reduces the cognitive load of trying to look at how someone else's ideas fit into what you're doing. So that's sort of what I've been working on for the last few weeks, or I've been thinking about it for a lot longer. But
yeah, I'd love to see a visual example of this, because it's a very node kind of edge kind of graph kind of thing of what I'm interpreting from this. I'd love to one-on-one chat or in maybe your own space to maybe explore it would be fantastic.
There's that app called Obsidian, and it's similar to that. I just want to try to work on ways of making it into something that's more collaborative, or making something similar that's more collaborative, and maybe even something that you can deploy into a distributed system, like with a distributed backend. But yeah, so it'll give you an idea of what I'm looking at. Like I think there's too many features on Obsidian. Like you can install a whole bunch of plugins and everything, and spend a lot of time working on setting up how you do things instead of actually working on ideas. So, but it's a good example of the sort of thing that I'm working on.
Could you send me the link for it? I think you've got me on Discord or Telegram. I'll take a look at it, because it could also have applications to Catalyst contributors, because obviously they might do brainstorming sessions, this, that, and the other, or have a way to kind of collate information. So it'll be interesting just to kind of see it, to have context for that when thinking about that, because there could be
for the like Obsidian app or
yeah, Obsidian, and also what you're working on as well. Just kind of just so I have more context.
Okay, like I don't have too much. I sort of tend to like to work on the front end first, and then I have something visual I can use to test backend stuff. So that's sort of what I've been doing. But
oh yeah, it's just so I have more. I'm quite visual, so if I can visually comprehend it a bit more, then just gives me those ideas will come out of my head. It'd be like, okay, this is a way we could use it, or it could be useful in some way. So throw things at me for sure. I might stop recording just so it doesn't get too long. Does anyone else have anything that needs to be in this recording for the kickoff meeting? I imagine no. And I'll call it. There we go. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching. I'm going to stop recording. Yes.